The great hall of the Galactic Assembly was quiet. It was a deep, heavy quiet, the kind that comes before bad news is made official. Representative Min-Su of humanity sat in his simple chair. Around him were beings from 1,000 different stars. Some were like large insects. Others looked like floating jellyfish or walking plants. The air smelled of strange spices and metals. Min-Su was a calm man. His hair was gray at the temples. His hands rested on the smooth table. He did not look at the large screen that showed the map of the galaxy. He already knew what it would show. He had seen the reports. Everyone had. The problem had a name, the Devourer Wave. It was not an enemy you could talk to. It was a force like a cosmic storm. It ate stars, planets, everything in its path. It moved slowly, but it never stopped. And now it was coming towards the heart of the galaxy, where all the important, powerful species lived. The head of the assembly, a being called the Facilitator, began to speak. Its voice was translated directly into Min-Su's ear. Members of the assembly, the Facilitator said. Its body was soft and blue, with many gentle arms. The data is clear. Our combined fleets cannot stop the wave in open battle. It absorbs our energy weapons. It outnumbers our ships 1,000 to 1. To fight it head-on is to die for nothing. A low hum of agreement moved through the hall. No one liked this, but they all believed it was true. Fear was a smell in the room now. The Velteran Dominion's strategic mind has provided a solution. The Facilitator continued. A tall, slender being with skin like polished silver stood up. This was the Velteran strategist. The solution is the necessary fold, the strategist said. Its voice was cold and clear, like a computer. We must think of the galaxy as a body. When a deadly infection approaches, a wise being will cut off a finger to save the arm. We must cut off the outer regions to save the core. On the big screen, the galaxy map changed. A large section of the outer spiral arm, far from the core worlds, turned a slow, pulsing red. Inside that red zone were hundreds of star systems. 17 of them had life. One of them was the Epsilon Eridani cluster. Min-Su's breath stayed even. His heart did not jump. He had known this was coming. The Epsilon Eridani cluster held 2 human worlds, New Jiangju and Haven. They were young colonies, only 50 years old. 4 million people lived there, people who had left Earth to build new homes, people who had families, farms, schools. His niece, Sujin, was a pilot stationed at Haven. The fold requires 2 actions, the strategist explained. First, all mutual defense pacts between the core systems and the border systems are hereby dissolved. They are null. Second, the systems within the red zone will be designated as buffer territories. All military and government personnel will be withdrawn. The populations there will be left to their fate. The hall was silent. The strategist meant that everyone in the red zone would be abandoned. They would be left for the Devourer Wave to swallow. It was a sacrifice, a cold, mathematical decision. The resources saved by not defending these distant, militarily weak points, the strategist said, will allow us to build an impenetrable defensive sphere around the core worlds. Here, civilization will survive. It is logic. It is necessity. The Facilitator raised one of its arms. The Assembly will now vote. Approval of the necessary fold protocol means agreeing to dissolve all pacts and enact the buffer zone. One by one, the lights next to each delegation's name turned green. Green for yes. Green for survival. Green for leaving others behind. The Velterans, the avian hegemony, the silent chorus of Revik. All of them, they voted to save themselves. Min-Su watched the green lights spread like a disease across the panel. He felt the eyes of the other humans at his table. Jiyoung, his aide, was sitting very straight. Her pen was held so tightly her knuckles were white. Min-Su did not move to vote. The human seat remained gray. It did not matter. The vote was nearly unanimous. The measure passes, the Facilitator said, its voice filled with false sadness. The pacts are ended. The buffer is enacted. May the universe remember the sacrifice of the border systems. That was when the expected thing would happen. The delegates from the systems in the red zone were supposed to scream, to protest, to beg for mercy. A few did. A tentacled being from a water world let out a shrill cry of despair before its comms were cut off. The assembly watched with pity, but also with relief. That was the proper reaction. All eyes turned to the human delegation. Humanity was new to the assembly. They were seen as clever but young and emotional. The council expected tears. They expected Minsu to stand up and make a passionate, useless speech about justice. Minsu stood up. But he did not speak. He looked at the facilitator. He looked at the Velteron strategist. His face showed no anger. No sadness. It was blank. Like a closed door. He tapped a small device on his wrist. A single, silent signal was sent. It was not a call for help. It was a code word. A word sent to every human ship, every station, every colony. The word was gain. Then, Minsu simply nodded to Jiyoung. She closed her data slate. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet hall. She stood up. Behind them, the three other humans in the delegation, the military advisor, the science attaché, the cultural liaison, all stood up at the exact same moment. They did not look at the assembly. They did not shake their fists. They turned, as one person, and walked towards the great arched doorway of the hall. Their footsteps echoed. No one else moved. The facilitator's many arms were frozen. The strategist's silver head tilted in confusion. The humans walked out. They left the chamber. They left the debate. They left the Galactic Assembly and its logic of sacrifice behind. The door slid shut behind them. The silence in the hall was now complete and total. It was a silence of deep, unsettling shock. The avian historian, an old being with wise eyes, finally whispered to its neighbor, a furry diplomat. They just left. The furry diplomat shrugged, trying to feel brave. They see it is hopeless. They go to mourn in private. It is dignified. The avian historian watched the empty human table. A cold feeling settled in its bones. It had studied many young species. It knew the signs of grief. It knew the signs of rage. What it had just seen was neither. No, the historian whispered, mostly to itself. That was not the walk of the defeated. That was the first step of the storm. The silence in the assembly hall did not break for a long time. It was a thick, uncomfortable quiet. The giant screen still showed the galaxy map with its bleeding red zone. The human delegation's chairs were empty. The light by their name was still gray. The facilitator finally moved its soft arms, a gesture of slow confusion. The session continues, it said, but its voice was less sure now. On the Velteron strategist's platform, a low discussion happened. Their words were not translated. The silver-skinned beings glanced at the closed door. One of them made a sharp, dismissive motion with a three-fingered hand. The meaning was clear. The humans were irrelevant. Their dramatic exit changed nothing. The math was still the math. Across the galaxy, on the bridge of the human battle carrier Unyielding, Admiral Taehun watched the assembly feed on a small monitor. The sound was off. He had seen Minsu stand. He had seen the walkout. A small, hard smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes, which were dark and tired. Signal confirmed, Admiral. A young comms officer said. Code gain. From the assembly floor. Taehun nodded. Acknowledge. Execute Phase 1. Quietly, Captain Sujin stood beside his command chair. She was younger, her black hair tied back tightly. She watched the Velteron strategist on the screen, its cold face explaining the logic of the fold to the now relieved assembly. Do they really think we'll just lie down? Sujin asked, her voice low. Taehun kept his eyes on the screen. They don't know what to think. They have a script. Grief, pleading, acceptance. We skipped to the end. They're waiting for the next scene, and the actors have left the theater. Back in the assembly, the avian historian could not focus on the new discussions about resource allocation for the core defense sphere. Its feathers were slightly puffed, a sign of deep unease. It pulled up the public human networks on its private viewer. It expected to see chaos. News anchors on Earth crying. Politicians giving angry, helpless speeches. Riots in the streets of Mars. It saw none of that. It saw a press conference from the United Earth Defense spokesperson. A woman named Yuna. She stood at a simple podium. Her face was calm, but her eyes were like stone. The Galactic Assembly has voted to dissolve mutual defense pacts, Yuna said. Humanity acknowledges this decision. Our colonies in the Epsilon Eridani cluster, New Gyeongju and Haven, now fall outside of galactic protection. No further diplomatic comment is available at this time. Thank you. That was it. No questions were taken. The feed cut. The historian quickly searched other feeds. It saw the shipyards around Jupiter. Instead of panic, the view showed a sudden, organized frenzy. Massive civilian freighters were being directed into docking bays. They weren't being loaded with families and goods for evacuation. They were having their hulls painted with dark, non-reflective coatings. They were having external hardpoints welded onto their structures. On the lunar launch fields, lines of people stretched for kilometers. Not lines of people trying to escape. These were lines of volunteers. Mechanics, engineers, doctors, and ordinary men and women signing forms. Their faces were set, determined. There were no tears. The historian switched to a public broadcast from New Gyeongju itself. It expected screaming, looting, the breakdown of society. Instead, it saw a town hall meeting in a colony square. A man, the local governor, was speaking to a crowd of thousands. They have written us off, the governor said, his voice amplified but steady. Out there, they think our lives are a number they can subtract, a cost they can bear. We will show them the cost. The crowd did not roar in anger. They listened in silence. Then they began to disperse, moving with purpose. Farmers drove their harvesters towards the perimeter fences. Teachers led their students in reinforcing community shelters. The colony's few defense mechs were being serviced not by soldiers, but by teams of civilians and technicians working together. The historian felt a chill. This was not the reaction of a sacrificed people. This was the reaction of a people digging in the assembly hall. The session was winding down. The decision was made. The core worlds felt safe. The unpleasant business of the border systems was done. As delegates began to float and walk towards the exits, many passed the human desk. They looked at it as if it were a grave. The Velteron strategist approached the avian historian. A curious display, it said, its voice a synthetic hum. But emotion is a waste of energy. They will spend their final days in futile activity. It is a more productive form of mourning, I suppose. The historian looked at the closed door the humans had used. You studied their military capacity, their industrial output, their population density. Did you ever study their history? History is sentiment. Data is truth, the strategist replied. Then your data is incomplete, the historian said, turning to leave. You know what they can do. You have no idea what they will do. Meanwhile, in a quiet corridor far from the assembly hall, Min-soo and his team walked. Their steps were fast and sure. They did not speak until they entered a small, secure lift. The door closed, shielding them from any sensors. Ji-young let out a long, slow breath. They didn't even try to stop us. They just watched us go. They saw what they wanted to see, Min-soo said, his calm finally cracking to show the steel beneath. They saw a child stomping out of the room. Good. Let them think that. The lift descended to a private hangar bay. A sleek human diplomatic shuttle waited, its engines already humming softly. As they boarded, Min-soo looked at his wristcom. It was blinking with a new, encrypted message. It was from Admiral Tae-hun. It was not a request for orders. It was a notification. Operation Hangbok is active. The garden is being prepared. Min-soo deleted the message. He took his seat as the shuttle doors sealed. Through the viewport, he could see the glittering spires of the Galactic Core Station, a monument to a civilization that had just betrayed its own principles for survival. Take us home, he said to the pilot. Maximum safe speed. As the shuttle shot out of the hangar and into the dark sea of stars, Min-soo did not look back. The talking was over. The galaxy had made its choice. Now, humanity would make theirs. And for the first time, watching the cold, logical core worlds shrink behind them, Minsu felt not dread, but a strange, clear certainty. The assembly had feared the devourer wave. Soon, he thought, they will learn to fear the silence that answered them. They will learn that a human silence is not peace. It is the quiet moment before the storm hits. And the storm was already moving. The news feeds across the core worlds began to tell a soothing story. They called it the noble sacrifice of the fringe. They showed images of beautiful, doomed planets, including file footage of New Gyeongju's green valleys and Haven's blue oceans. Commentators spoke in sad, respectful tones about the hard logic of survival. The public, safe in their advanced cities, felt a distant pity. Life went on. But in hidden offices and secure observation posts, a different picture was forming. The Galactic Council's intelligence networks were not watching the human news. They were watching the human traffic. The data was confusing. It made no sense. Admiral Taehan's order, Operation Hengbok, was not a single command. It was a key turning 1,000 locks at once. Across human space, a switch had been flipped. The mood was not one of panic, but of focused urgency. A quiet, determined energy hummed through every station, every ship, every town. The first strange report came from the shipping lanes. Large civilian freighters, the kind that usually carried grain or machinery, were changing their transponder codes. They were not heading inward, toward the safety of the core. They were heading outward, toward the Epsilon Eridani cluster, toward the red zone. The Velteron strategist received the report in its sterile office. It examined the data. They are attempting a civilian evacuation, it said to a subordinate. A sentimental and doomed effort. Their freighters are slow. They do not have the capacity for 4 million souls. They will save a few thousand at most. Let them try. It changes nothing. But a day later, a new report arrived. The freighters were not being loaded with people. Scans showed their massive cargo holds were being filled with raw materials. Steel plates, carbon composites, canisters of chemical propellant. They were carrying building supplies into the danger zone. At the same time, the shipyards around Saturn did something unprecedented. Every single construction bay lit up. But they were not building new, sleek warships. That took years. Instead, they were ripping apart old cargo haulers and civilian liners. They were cutting open hulls and welding on thick armor plates. They were installing powerful but simple railgun batteries onto ships that were never meant for war. The strategist frowned at the images. They are arming their civilians. A desperate, final militia. They will die faster in cheap ships than on the ground. An inefficient use of resources. Yet the scale was bothering it. The mobilization was not small or frantic. It was vast, organized, and shockingly fast. It was as if every human had been waiting for this moment, knowing exactly what job to do. The avian historian had requested all non-classified human historical data. It sat in its nest-like study, scrolling through centuries of information. It read about world wars fought on a single planet. It read about something called total war, where the line between soldier and factory worker disappeared. It read about cultures that believed a threat to one was a threat to all. A concept called INSA, a debt of loyalty that could never be broken. At IT found an old video from Earth's past. A city was being bombed from the air. The buildings were stone, primitive, but the people below were not running away. They were forming lines, passing buckets of water. They were digging through rubble with their bare hands to pull out their neighbors. Their faces were smudged with dirt and etched with exhaustion, but not with defeat. The historian felt a deep old fear. It had seen societies break under such pressure. It had never seen one coil itself into a spring. On New Gyeongju, Governor Park was overseeing the transformation of his colony. The order from Earth had been clear. Prepare to receive. Fortify. Hold. No one had ordered an evacuation. The message was the opposite. Stay. Farmers used their heavy equipment to dig deep trenches along the likely approach vectors. Teachers and their students packed sandbags. The colony's fusion reactor was being surrounded by layers of scrap metal and earth, turned into a hardened fortress. In the main square, people brought their personal belongings, tools, generators, medical supplies, to be cataloged and shared. A young woman, a pilot named Sujin's cousin, stood watching a crew weld plates onto the side of a school building. An older man, her neighbor, walked up to her. He held a worn metal box. "My father was a soldier," the neighbor said. "Old-fashioned. This is his." He opened the box. Inside, on a faded cloth, lay a simple, well-cared-for rifle from Earth's past. "I don't know how to use it, but someone here might." This scene repeated itself a million times over. It was not a government collecting weapons. It was a people preparing to defend their home, handing their history and their trust to the person next to them. Back in the core, the strategist was finally presented with a simulation. It showed the projected outcome of the Devourer wave meeting the human colonies. The old simulation showed a quick, bright flash of resistance, then nothing. A junior analyst, a being from a more empathetic species, had run a new simulation. It included the new variables, the fortified planets, the swarm of armed civilian ships, the lack of any attempt to flee. The result was not a quick flash. It was a slow, bloody smear across the map. The wave would still win, the simulation said, but it would take longer. It would lose more of its own mass. The humans would inflict casualties out of all proportion to their military rating. The strategist studied the messy, prolonged result. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold logic appeared in its mind. It was annoyance. This was not a clean, efficient sacrifice. This was inconvenient. It was making the neat mathematics of the fold look messy. It sent a terse query to the Human Diplomatic Service. "Clarify your activities in the Epsilon Eridani cluster. The Assembly recommends orderly evacuation while time permits." The reply from Earth came within minutes. It was not from a diplomat. It was from Admiral Tehun's office. It was only 5 words. "We are gardening. Do not disturb." The strategist did not understand the message. Checked the translation. It was correct. Gardening. The cultivation of plants. The avian historian, when it heard of the message, understood immediately. It remembered the human concept of hengbak, happiness, prosperity, a state of well-being. A garden was something you nurture. You protect it from pests. You fight for it. You do not run from it and let it be consumed. The historian looked out at the peaceful, glittering spires of the core world outside its window. A civilization so advanced it had calculated the value of lives and found some wanting. It thought of the humans, not building escape ships, but digging trenches around their homes. The fear settled in its bones, cold and heavy. The galaxy had not sacrificed a weak, pleading species. It had kicked a hornet's nest. And now the hornets were not flying away in fear. They were fortifying the nest. They were sharpening their stingers. They were waiting. The storm was not coming. The storm was already there, growing quietly in the dark of the buffer zone, and it had absolutely no intention of blowing away. The galaxy held its breath. Time was a slow, tightening cord. The Devourer wave was a dark blot on the long-range scanners, creeping closer to the red zone border. In the core worlds, life was a nervous routine. Defenses were built, speeches were made about unity, and the sacrifice of the border systems was spoken of with a respectful, distant sadness. All eyes, hidden and open, were now fixed on the Epsilon Eridani cluster. The curiosity had become an obsession. What were the humans doing? The Velteron strategist watched the sensor feeds. They were fuzzy. The humans were using a lot of electronic noise, a crude but effective jamming. But the outlines were clear, and they were not of a people preparing to die. New Jiangju was transforming. The small, green colony now had a ring of skeletal metal around its equator. It was not a neat military defense platform. It was a messy belt of asteroids, old ship hulls, and construction debris, all pulled into orbit and welded together into a jagged nest. Inside that nest, thermal signatures showed the heat of foundries and engine tests. They were making weapons inside their own rubbish. Haven, the ocean world, was doing something worse. Its few island cities had become fortresses, yes, but its real project was underwater. Deep, cold thermal spikes suggested mining and construction on the seafloor. They were building down where most orbital weapons would be useless. But it was the space between the planets that truly confused galactic doctrine. The human fleet had arrived. It was not what anyone expected. The Galactic Corps' fleets were beautiful. Ships of clean lines, glowing with shield emitters, moving in perfect, synchronized formations. They were like formal dancers. The human fleet looked like a junkyard had learned to fly. At its heart were the few real warships, like the battle carrier Unyielding. But around them swam a chaotic cloud of other vessels. Old freighters with extra armor plates welded on haphazardly, giving them a lumpy, uneven shape. Mining barges converted into missile boats, their drills still attached. Fast civilian yachts now carrying sensor jamming equipment. There were hundreds of them. They moved in loose, unpredictable swarms, not rigid lines. They practiced sudden, aggressive bursts of speed, hiding behind the larger, slower ships. The strategist had its analysts run the patterns. The computers struggled. Tactical chaos, read one report. Low individual survivability projection, read another. The avian historian read those reports and felt a colder chill. The humans were not following the rules of war because they were not fighting a war of fleets. They were not trying to win a battle in open space. The pattern, to the historian, was clear. They were preparing to bleed the enemy. Every lumpy freighter was a distraction. Every mining barge was a trap. They were turning the entire star system into a maze of pain. A message, tight-beamed and encrypted, arrived for the historian. It was from an old contact, a communications officer on the Velteron observation post. It contained an audio file, marked Human Open Channel Colony Haven. The historian listened. It expected cries, prayers, or military commands. Instead, it heard a man's voice, calm and slightly scratchy, like from an old radio. "All right, Haven Fishing Fleet, this is Control. Drill number 7. Group Alpha, you are eyes. Take your positions near the debris field at marker Delta. Group Beta, you are stingers. Stay dark until you hear the code word. The word is persimmon. Let's go." The audio was filled with the crackle of simple, clear replies. Alpha moving. Beta holding dark. They were civilian call signs. Seashell. Marlin. Old Hat. They were practicing. They were drilling. The civilians were part of the fleet. The historian saved the file. It was evidence of something the council had no category for. On the bridge of the Unyielding, Admiral Tae-hun sipped bitter coffee. Captain Soo-jin pointed to a hologram of the system. The last civilian convoy from the inner colonies just arrived. Carried the final shipment of carbon nanofiber. The orbital fortresses are as ready as they'll ever be. Tae-hun nodded. And the people on the ground? Soo-jin allowed herself a small, proud smile. The governor on New Gyeongju reports the community shelters are stocked for 2 years. The schools are running classes on emergency medicine and basic repair. They've adapted. That was the word, Tae-hun thought. They had adapted. The galaxy thought it had thrown them away. Instead, it had left them alone. And when humans were left alone with their backs against the wall, they built. They always had. A priority alert chimed. It was from the outermost sensor buoy, a stealth probe they'd placed far beyond the cluster. The buoy had died immediately after sending its data. The last thing it saw was the leading edge of the Devourer wave entering neighboring space. It was eating a small, uninhabited ice dwarf planet. The process took less than an hour. "It's in the next system," Soo-jin said, her voice quiet. "Estimate 72 hours until it reaches our outer marker." Tae-hun stood up. He walked to the large viewport, looking out at the messy, beautiful swarm of human ships protecting the 2 small, bright planets. He thought of the 4 million people down there. Not a statistic. 4 million individuals with names, with families, with a favorite view from their window. "Send the final system-wide signal," he said, his voice not loud, but carrying across the quiet bridge. "The garden is planted. The weather is coming. Stand firm." Across New Gyeongju and Haven, in bunkers and ship cabins and fortified homes, the message was received. There was no panic. In a shelter on New Gyeongju, a teacher named Ji-hoon finished the story he was reading to the children. He closed the book. "The story is done for today," he said. "Now we go help our parents with the checklist. Remember your jobs." A little girl looked up. "Will the monsters come now?" Jehun nodded. "Yes, but this is our home. And we know how to take care of our home, don't we?" In the Galactic Assembly, a silent watching room had been set up. Representatives could observe the sensor feeds from the buffer zone. Many came, their faces solemn. They watched the humans' chaotic preparations with a mix of pity and horror. It looked so desperate, so ugly compared to their own clean defenses. The Velteron strategist stood at the back. It watched the two worlds, lit up with activity, and the strange fleet between them. Its earlier annoyance had grown into a dull, nagging feeling. The mathematics were becoming unstable. The humans were adding variables it could not quantify. Variables like the will of a teacher in a bunker. Variables like a code word called persimmon. The avian historian stood beside it. "You see it now, don't you?" the historian whispered. The strategist did not answer for a long time. It watched a tactical overlay try and fail to predict the movement of the humans' junker fleet. "They are not behaving rationally," the strategist finally stated. "They should be trying to preserve their species' continuity. This is preservation of place, of soil. It is illogical." "To you," the historian said. "To them it is everything. You ended your pact with a government. You did not realize your pact was with every single one of them. And they have just renewed it with each other." On the screen, the Devourer wave crossed an invisible line. It entered the Epsilon Eridani system. The first human sensor markers winked out. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The Devourer wave was not a fleet. It was a tide. It came in a rolling wall of dark matter and berserker drones. The drones were not ships. They were like sharp, ugly rocks, propelled by a terrible energy. They did not communicate. They only consumed. Standard galactic warfare was useless against it. Energy weapons were absorbed. Shields were drained. The only proven strategy was the fold. Get out of its path. The human system had no shields. It had no clean energy weapons. It had something else. The first wave of drones hit the outer debris field. This was the messy ring of asteroids and scrap around New Gyeongju. Galactic observers saw it as just garbage. They expected the drones to smash through it. They did not. As the drones entered the field, small, hot explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum. Not from missiles, from simple chemical bombs planted on the rocks. The explosions did not destroy many drones. They did something better. They changed the direction of the debris. 1,000 asteroids, each no bigger than a house, were suddenly sent tumbling on new, chaotic paths. The drone tide crashed into the spinning field of stone and metal. It was like running into a blender. Drones shattered against larger rocks. Others were knocked off course, sent spinning into each other. The observation room in the galactic core was silent. The Velteron strategist leaned forward. This was unorthodox, wasteful of material, but effective in a crude way. Then the human fleet moved, or rather, it swarmed. The command came from the unyielding, not as a detailed order but as a simple directive. All groups, execute pattern broken willow. Good hunting. What followed made no sense to the watching tacticians. The neat formations of core fleets were a dance. This was a street fight. The lumpy, armored freighters did not fire from a distance. They waited. They let the first ranks of drones pass the debris field. Then, they ignited their engines and charged into the wave, not away from it. They crashed head-on into the drones, their reinforced bows smashing through the enemy lines. They were not trying to kill. They were trying to disrupt, to break the tide into smaller, confused streams. As the drones focused on these mad, charging freighters, the other human ships struck. The converted mining barges, hiding behind the freighters, unleashed their payloads. They did not fire guided missiles. They fired clouds of high-velocity scrap metal, like cosmic shotgun blasts. At such close range, the drones could not avoid it. An image flashed on the main viewer. It was from the nose camera of a freighter called Gyeongju's Pride. The pilot's voice, calm and clear, filled the observation room. "All right, we're in. Drone density is high. Deploying cable nets now." The freighter launched canisters that burst open into tough, weighted nets. They tangled a dozen drones together, causing them to crash into each other in a struggling knot. A moment later, the Gyeongju's Pride flew straight into that knot. The screen went white, then black. The transponder signal vanished. The avian historian closed its eyes. The humans were using their ships as physical weapons, as rams, as bait, as nets. "That ship was crewed by 24, a soft-voiced delegate whispered. They just traded 24 for 200, the historian replied, opening its eyes. "That is their math." Now the code words started to come over the open channels, picked up by the listening posts. "Persimmon, persimmon, persimmon," a voice yelled. It was the Haven fishing fleet. From behind the larger moon of Haven, a stream of small, fast craft emerged. They were civilian water jet boats, fitted with thrusters and a single weapon pod. They moved like angry insects, zipping in close to the drones that came near the planet. They fired harpoons attached to long, strong cables. They would harpoon a drone, then drag it, fighting and spinning, into the path of another. It was messy, dangerous, and effective. The Devourer wave was slowing. It was not being stopped, but it was being chewed. Every meter of advance cost it more than it had ever paid before. On the bridge of the unyielding, Admiral Taehun watched the tactical map. It was a mess of red enemy markers and blinking blue human ones that kept disappearing. Each blink was a ship gone, a crew lost. His face was stone. "Admiral, the Steadfast is gone. The Morning Star reports critical damage. They are setting a collision course for the largest drone cluster." Taehun simply nodded. "Acknowledge their sacrifice." Captain Sujin was coordinating a different fight. "Orbital Platform Sigma is gone. But the drones that took it are now in range of the asteroid belt guns. They're firing." From within the messy ring of debris, hidden gun emplacements fired. They were simple railguns shooting solid slugs of tungsten. No energy to absorb, just kinetic force. At close range, they punched straight through the drone formations. The wave was now fully inside the human system. It was surrounded on all sides by buzzing, stinging, crashing human vessels and fortified positions. It was being attacked from every direction. In the core observation room, the mood had shifted from pity to cold, gripping shock. They were not watching a sacrifice. They were watching a slaughter where both sides were bleeding, and the humans did not seem to care about their own blood. The Velteron strategists stared at the data. The loss ratio was impossible. For every human ship lost, they were destroying dozens, sometimes hundreds of drones. The humans were fighting with a total disregard for self-preservation. They were fighting to inflict maximum damage, not to survive. "This is not tactics," the strategist murmured, its silver fingers pausing over the data stream. "This is metabolism, a body fighting an infection. It burns. It bleeds. It does not count the cost." A new signal came through, visual from the surface of New Gyeongju. The drones that made it through the chaos in space were beginning to streak down into the atmosphere. The view was from a street in the main colony. People were running, but not away. They were running to positions. A group of civilians was manning a heavy machine gun mounted on the back of a farming vehicle. They fired tracer rounds into the sky, guiding fire towards the falling drones. Another camera showed a drone crashing into a fortified school. The building shook. Then, from the hole in the wall, people emerged, covered in dust. They were pulling others out. They were forming a bucket line to fight the fire. They were still fighting. The facilitator of the assembly, watching this, felt its many arms go limp. It understood now. The humans had not stayed to die for their home. They had stayed to make their home die with them, to make every street, every field, cost the enemy more than it could afford. The Devourer wave was still advancing, but its smooth, consuming roll was gone. It was now a stumbling, bleeding mass, caught in a threshing machine made of human will and scrap metal. The storm was not just hitting. The storm was holding the line. The battle was no longer in space. It had come down to the ground. The sky over New Gyeongju was stained with black smoke and the hot orange trails of falling drones. The air crackled with the sound of railgun fire from the last orbital platforms and the sharper, closer cracks of ground-based weapons. The human fleet was a shadow of itself. The beautiful, messy swarm was gone, replaced by scattered, wounded ships still fighting in small, furious packs. But they had done their job. The Devourer wave was broken into pieces. It was no longer a tidal wave. It was 1,000 separate, angry streams crashing against the human worlds and the colony's main operations bunker. Deep under a mountain, Governor Park coughed in the dust-filled air. A screen showed a map of the valley. Red dots were landing everywhere. Green dots, representing his people, were moving to meet them. A farmer, his name was Gene, had rallied his neighbors. They used their heavy harvesting mechs not to gather crops, but to crush drones that landed in the fields. They had welded old plow blades to the mech's arms like giant swords. The video feed showed a mech, painted with bright flowers, swinging its blade and slicing a drone in half before being overwhelmed by 3 more. The signal died. Jin's last known location turned from green to gray on another channel. A teacher named Mina was coordinating a rescue team from what was left of the secondary school. They had no weapons, but they had medkits, water, and courage. They pulled people from collapsed buildings, ignoring the drones buzzing overhead. A smaller drone dove at them. A teenager, one of Mina's former students, threw a rock at it. It was a useless gesture. But another man, a cook from the community kitchen, threw a metal pot. Then another person threw a piece of pipe. The drone, confused by the hail of junk, veered away. The humans were fighting with everything, not just guns. With tractors, with rocks, with their bare hands. They were fighting for every street, every house, every life. High above, the battle carrier unyielding was a wounded beast. Its hull was scarred and open to space in 3 places. Admiral Tae-hun held onto his command chair as another blast shook the deck. Captain Soo-jin reports the last of the Haven interceptors are gone. The fishing fleet is silent. An officer reported, voice shaking. Tae-hun looked at the main viewer. It showed the planet below, dotted with fires. It showed the broken remains of the Devourer wave. The enemy was still vast, but it was no longer organized. It was just dangerous, like a shattered glass, each piece still sharp. Redirect all remaining orbital fire. Tae-hun ordered, his voice a dry rasp. Forget the big clusters. Target the streams heading for population centers. Even if you only hit one, you hit one. On Haven, the fight was in the water. The drones that hit the ocean did not stop. They kept moving, seeking the deep-sea generators. What they found were walls. The humans had built vast, simple walls of reinforced concrete on the ocean floor around their key sites. The drones smashed against them, and from slits in those walls, torpedoes fired. Old, dumb torpedoes from Haven's defense stockpile. They exploded in the dark water, sending shockwaves that crumpled drone after drone. It was ugly, brutal, and it was working in the Galactic observation room. No one spoke. The scale of the defiance was beyond anything in their histories. They had records of noble last stands. But this was not a last stand. This was a systemic rejection of death. It was as if every single human, from the admiral to the child, had collectively decided that the Devourer wave would have to break its teeth on them. One by one. The avian historian watched a feed from a helmet camera on New Gyeongju. A young woman, a soldier, was crouched behind a broken wall. Her rifle was empty. A drone skittered around the corner, its edges sharp and glowing. The soldier looked at it. Then she looked at the camera. She smiled a tired, fierce smile. "Tell them," she said, her breath loud in the microphone. "Tell the council it's not about being strong." She picked up a piece of rebar from the rubble. "It's about being here." She charged the drone, her scream raw over the audio. The feed cut to static. The historian looked away from the screen. It looked at the other delegates. They were staring, their faces showing horror, awe, and a deep, shameful understanding. The humans were proving, with every drop of blood, that the Assembly's calculation was wrong. Some lives were not expendable because the people living them refused to be expended. The Veltron strategist was motionless. Its logic processors were overwhelmed. The variables had become infinite. The will of a farmer in a mech. The anger of a teacher with a rock. The smile of a soldier with no ammunition. This was not data. This was chaos. And it was defeating the greatest physical threat the galaxy had ever known. On the bridge of the unyielding, a new alarm sounded. It was a different sound. A deep, resonant pulse from the long-range sensors. "Admiral!" the sensor officer shouted, disbelief in her voice. "The Devourer wave. It's receding." Tae-hun stumbled to the sensor station. The map showed it clearly. The red mass that had been pressing inward was now pulling back. The drones were breaking off. They were retreating from the atmosphere, from the orbital space, gathering into a confused, wounded cloud, and then, slowly beginning to move back the way they came. It was not a strategic retreat. It was a rout. The wave had encountered something it had never met before. Not a stronger force, but an immovable will. An enemy that would not just fight to the last soldier, but would make the last soldier, the last child, the last cook with a metal pot, a lethal problem. The Devourer wave was not beaten in strength. It was beaten in spirit. It had been bled dry by a species that considered its own blood a fair price for its home. Silence fell on the bridge. The only sounds were the crackle of damaged systems and the ragged breathing of the crew. Captain Sujin's face appeared on a cracked comm screen. She was on the surface of Haven, her face smudged with soot. "Admiral, they're leaving. They're actually leaving." Tae-hun looked at the viewer, at the planet below, wounded but alive. The fires still burned, but the rain of death had stopped. He slowly sank back into his chair. The tension that had held him up for days seemed to drain away, leaving only a vast, hollow exhaustion. "Report to Earth," he said quietly. "Tell them, the storm is passing. The garden stands." In the Galactic Council's observation room, the truth was now a physical weight in the air. The humans had not just survived. They had done the impossible. They had broken the unbreakable. And they had done it alone, after the Assembly had left them for dead. The humans had not just won a battle. They had shown the entire galaxy what a promise was truly worth. And in doing so, they had made every other pact in the room seem like words written on smoke. The fear in the room was no longer for the humans. It was of them. The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was full. Every delegate from every major species was present. The air was not one of meeting. It was one of ceremony, thick with tension and shame. The giant screen showed the human symbol, a blue circle with a simple white star. The humans had been invited. A new invitation was sent every day for a week. The language grew more pleading, more full of honor. They spoke of humanity's unmatched spirit and galactic heroism. They begged for the human voice to help shape the future. Finally, a short message came back. It said only, "We will come. Once." Now, the massive doors at the rear of the hall opened. Representative Min-soo entered. He was not wearing formal robes. He wore a simple, dark suit. On his left walked Captain Sujin. Her uniform was clean, but the empty sleeve where her left arm had been was pinned up neatly. Her face was calm, but her eyes were like black stones. Behind them came two others. One was a young officer, his face marked by a fresh scar. The other was an older woman in a civilian engineer's jumpsuit. They walked to their table and stood behind their chairs. They did not sit. The entire assembly watched them. No one spoke. The silence was a living thing. The facilitator, the soft blue being, moved to the central podium. Its voice, when it came, was gentle and full of false warmth. "Representative Min-soo, Captain Sujin, heroes of the galaxy, we welcome you with the deepest gratitude. Your stand has changed everything. You have shown us that the Devourer can be resisted. In light of your incredible sacrifice, the Assembly has drafted a new galactic compact. Humanity is offered a permanent leading seat. Your defense fleet will be the core of a new united armada. All resources of the core worlds will be at your disposal. Together, we will be safe. The words were sweet. They were the offer of everything the galaxy had to give. Power, safety, glory. Minsu looked at the facilitator. He did not look at the screen or the other delegates. His gaze was steady and cold. You ended all pacts, Minsu said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the hall. You voted to abandon our people. You called our homes a buffer. You called our lives expendable. The facilitator shifted uncomfortably. In the face of extinction, choices are tragic. But now, from this tragedy, we can build a stronger. We are not here to build with you, Captain Sujin said. Her voice was clear and sharp. It did not ask for permission to speak. The assembly seemed to flinch back from the sound. We are here to deliver our answer. Minsu placed a small, plain data chip on the table. He slotted it into the port. The grand symbol on the big screen vanished. It was replaced by a list. A simple, scrolling list of names. Kim Jean. Farmer. Confirmed. Park. Mina. Teacher. Confirmed. Lee Jihun. Pilot. Confirmed. Choi Sujin. Captain. Confirmed. Next to many names was a small symbol. A simple five-pointed star. The list scrolled. Dozens of names. Then hundreds. Then thousands. It kept going. This is not a treaty, Minsu said. This is the ledger. The price of our home. You valued it at 0. You were wrong. The hall was utterly silent except for the soft hum of the screen. The names kept coming. Each one was a person. Each star was a death in the void. On a ship the assembly had watched die without helping. You offer us a new pact, Minsu continued. You want to borrow our strength. You want to use the will we showed. But that will does not belong to you. It belongs to the person next to us. It belongs to the soil of Haven. It belongs to the streets of New Jiangju. You watched us fight, but you did not understand what we fought for. The Velterun strategist rose. The silver skin seemed tarnished. This is emotional thinking. The galaxy is a dangerous place. Alone, you will not survive the next crisis. Unity is the only logical path. You must join us. Minsu looked at the strategist for a long moment. Your logic is a disease, he said, his voice flat. It is the logic that sacrifices children for a percentage point of safety. We want no part of it. He removed the data chip. The list of names vanished, leaving the screen dark and empty. Humanity will defend its own, Minsu declared. Our ships will guard our worlds. Our people will rebuild our garden. We will live, and we will remember every name on that list. He placed his hands on the table and leaned forward slightly, his eyes sweeping over the gathered species. You ended the old pacts. We agree. They were built on lies. They were built on the idea that some lives are worth less. If you ever wish to build something real, you must first learn. You must learn that a pact is not a calculation. It is a promise. It is saying your life matters as much as mine when the night is darkest. You have not learned that. Until you do, do not call us. We will not answer. He straightened up and nodded to his team. They turned to leave. As they walked towards the doors, the avian historian stood. Its voice, old and raspy, called out not to the assembly, but to the humans' backs. How? It asked. The word echoed. How do we learn? Where do we start? Minsu did not stop. He did not turn. Captain Sujin paused. She looked back over her shoulder, her single eye locking with the historians. Start by learning their names, she said. Her gaze included every being in the room. Every single one. When their lives mean more to you than a number on a report. When you would trade your own core world to save a single one of them. Then send us a message. Then we might talk. Then she turned and followed Minsu out of the hall. The great doors closed behind them with a final, heavy sound. The assembly sat in the silence they left behind. The grand offer was still hanging in the air, but now it was exposed. It was not an offer of partnership. It was an attempt to buy what they had thrown away. It was an attempt to hire human courage because they had none of their own. The facilitator's many arms hung limp at its sides. The Velteron strategists stared at the empty human chairs as if they were a tombstone. The galaxy had watched in fear when the humans first walked out, not understanding what it meant. Now they understood. It was not a protest. It was a divorce. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had passed a judgment. And the judgment was that the Galactic Assembly, in its cold logic, was unworthy. They were alone. They had sacrificed their honor for survival, and in doing so, they had lost any right to stand beside the ones who had sacrificed everything but their honor. The fear in the room was now complete. It was the fear of being left in the dark by the only ones who had ever faced the dark and refused to blink. It was the fear of the storm that had passed, knowing it would never, ever shelter you.